Well, hi everyone. I'm Ellen Maese of Gallup. I'm a researcher and methodologist. For some of you we met yesterday, thank you. Once again, I have to say just that, we really see at Gallup our role in helping understand what's going on with COVID-19 and how it's affecting the American public as part of our mission to provide analytics and advice about everything that matters. So we're happy to have this opportunity again to share some of what we've been learning through this. Today, I'll be sharing some high-level insights about remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the data I'm going to discuss today comes from two primary sources. The first is an ongoing COVID-19 tracking study, which we began in mid-March when the pandemic hit. You can see on this instance map that reddish portion is the coverage of the data that I'll be discussing today, and that gray portion for October is the data that we've collected but haven't yet fully analyzed. Respondents were members of the Gallup panel, which is a probability-based, nationally representative US panel of adults. Members are randomly selected using random digit dial phone interviews and address-based sampling methods. And we do wait for probability of selection and to correct for non-response bias. So it's a pretty good view of what's going on in the US. Through September, we've had over 117,000 responses to this web survey, pretty evenly distributed over gender and age, with about 70% white respondents. We asked plethora of questions over the past 7 months, but many about remote work, which is something we're really interested in understanding at Gallup, including kind of like the frequency of remote work and kind of the attitudes and opinions about the future of remote work as well. The second source of data was a large, non-representative, but large population survey that we conducted right during the peak of the stay-at-home orders. So that was kind of that mid to late April timeframe when everyone was, when the states that did have stay-at-home orders had issued, and everyone was really in that remote work phase. So we kind of tried to capitalize on the unique circumstances to do a deeper dive. So in addition to some of the questions that we did ask of that ongoing tracking study, we dove a little deeper into what remote work really looked like for the people who were doing it. And so what we saw was we were able to capture this striking migration. We saw in less than 3 weeks, the percentage of adults working from home doubled. And so that's what's really unique about the timing of our data collections is we were able to capture this in real time as it was happening, this great migration to remote work. And so this is over, nearly 100 million workers in the US alone working from home who had never been working from home before. Interestingly, this is mostly mandated. We do know 76% say their employer required it, 12% say their employer recommended it, only about 5% said they were really given the choice. So this was, again, kind of a forced transition due to circumstance, which has a lot of implications for the way that people work. So here's what remote work really looks like for the people who are doing it. We're interested in understanding kind of the environment in which people were trying to work from home. About 73% were able to have some kind of home office or designated space, but that means that about a third, 1 in 3, are working in their living room, from their kitchen, all over the place wherever they can. We know that about 23%, so almost 1 in 4, have children present in their workspace during this time, which for those of you who are doing it, that's a huge distraction implication for your work. About half had roommates, spouses, or other individuals present as well. And when we're looking, at people's feelings about remote work, we did see some kind of changes over the course of remote work. Initially, we saw some pretty positive attitudes about remote work, which over time, interestingly, we saw kind of erode, and people started to say that they wanted to head back into the office more and more. So we see a little bit of that pandemic fatigue. But at that very peak time period, so kind of that mid-April time period, we're seeing about 40% of people strongly agree that they enjoyed working from home, that they wanted to remote work in the future. But people were feeling very disconnected from their organizations and from their teams. So we see about 16% strongly agree that they felt connected to their teammates. So that's only 16% are feeling that way. The rest are a little bit less enthusiastic. And we see the same thing for connection to the organization. And again, more than a third are feeling that they miss people around. So this is really a unique time period in the way that we get work done. And it really was a big adjustment, in fact. So for people who had transitioned to remote work during that time period, they went through some growing pains and kind of a negative transition in a lot of cases. We did see that for those who, hadn't been working remote before the pandemic but switched to working remote during that pandemic, we see elevated levels of loneliness and elevated and decreased levels of enjoyment in comparison to people who either stayed in the office the full time or those who had been previously working remote. Now, this slide has way too much information, but I'll try to breeze through it, and then I'm happy to answer questions. The bars are showing the frequency, the shift in the frequency of people working remote, showing pre-COVID levels in gray and post-COVID levels or during COVID levels in green. So we can see this is kind of averaging across the pandemic now. We can see that frequency shift. And we can see, if you look at the black lines, we're looking at the levels of employee engagement. So that's their motivation, commitment to their work across different levels of remote work. So whether they're working no remote work, some remote work, or all of the time. And we see some rank order stability in employee engagement. So a little bit higher levels of engagement actually during COVID, which is interesting. Number of explanations potentially there. Rank order stability. So we're seeing kind of the same pattern during COVID. But burnout's what's really striking. So people, I think, who are working, the most interesting finding really is people who are working all the time or almost all the time remote before the pandemic hit. You can see their levels of burnout are quite low. When we have the pandemic hit, they become quite high. And so we have this reversal of trend there for burnout, which is really striking. Way too much to dive into on this slide, but of course, remote work really changes the way we work. And so it becomes all about audio conference, video conference, and about 1 in 3 people actually say that these kinds of meetings, these virtual meetings, are less effective, which has pretty huge implications for the way that work's done. People are reporting a little bit of an increase in hours worked, a lot of increase in hours spent in meetings and hours working alone, of course. So that's huge changes in the way that people do their work. What's interesting is there's kind of a mixed effect on productivity, which has been the source of a lot of interest and debate among the consulting and business management world. And finally, obviously, remote work changes the way we live. And so it's having implications for kind of the work-life balance. People are working out of traditional hours. People are working on the weekends. People are interrupting their days to have, childcare responsibilities and other things come up. Working parents have been hit hardest. So they're balancing more than ever. Again, about 23% have children in their workspace during that peak time with the shutdown orders. And throughout we see elevated levels of stress and greater levels of life disruption among that population. And finally, I know that we are getting close to our time, but I did just want to mention we've been trying to track the factors that are related to differences in well-being outcomes and burnout outcomes. And so we did some deep dives into what are people doing on a daily basis that makes a difference in whether they're kind of doing well in terms of well-being or doing poorly. And again, the same with burnout. What we notice, a lot of these factors have an important differential here. All the good health behaviors that we know of, exercise, eating healthy foods. The interesting one was that social media really didn't have a good effect or any effect at all on burnout or on well-being. But other forms of kind of social engagement seem to be a little bit positive for well-being. And really strikingly, taking breaks was very important to reducing burnout during the day. So obviously with people working more hours and kind of work infringing on all hours of the week and the day, taking breaks seems to be very important. But even things as small as getting some natural light or going outdoors seems to be very helpful for people managing this transition to remote work.